Hi, yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Welcome to Fixing the Future 2023. What time is there in Sydney?
Thank you, and it's 7:15 p.m.
Okay, good afternoon then, or evening.
Yes, yeah, in the evening.
So
Thanks for having me.
tell us about Seabin Foundation, please.
Yes, I am sharing my screen. I'm not sure if you can see it. Would you be able to confirm that for me?
Yes, perfectly. We see you on the slide.
Oh, great, wonderful. So hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Bruno, for the introduction. As you mentioned, I am here to talk about the Seabin technology and Seabin Foundation as an organization. So to talk about the Seabin technology, I'll just switch to the next slide as we can have a look at the Seabin technology in action. So in 2015, two Australian friends went on a journey with an idea to do a crowdfunding campaign. They were based in Spain, in Mallorca, and raised the funds to launch the prototype work of the Seabin. It took 3 years after they had secured the funding to do it to have a commercial product. And in 2018, Seabins were available for hosts and mariners around the world to install Seabins in the water where they were. And Seabins were installed in over 50 countries. Over 1,000 of them were installed. And this has been the journey until 2020. From 2020 onwards, the mission has been focused on certain cities instead of spreading far and wide. So as we can see here, the Seabin technology is essentially a rubbish bin crossed with a full skimmer or a trash can, and it's filtering the top 1 centimeter, the top layer of the waterways surrounding the Seabin, where there are marine debris floating around. Marine debris can be made of branches, seaweed, leaves, but often all of these are entangled with all the plastics that are floating around, including microplastics. So Seabins work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They filter up to 1.3 million liters of water per day, which is the equivalent to about an Olympic swimming pool being filtered every 2 days for every single Seabin. And so they filter slowly the top layers, and the rubbish and the marine debris gets captured into a catch bag that is emptied once a day, ideally. And every day, this litter is taken away from the harbour or marina or port. So just to clarify, Seabins need electricity. They need to be installed somewhere on a floating structure or a fixed structure. They're not floating out at sea in the ocean. They're really in the upstream place of the issue of plastic pollution. So they're around rivers, ports, harbors, lakes, where the water is calm so that they can bubble up and down and filter the water while we're doing about our days. And so what we realized over the years is that not only the Seabins can clean up marine debris, but also they provide a lot of insights about what is happening in a marine environment. And those insights change from one location to the other. They change a lot. So thanks to many volunteers, citizen scientists around the world who volunteered their time over the first 5 years of the project, we realized that we can tell a story and we can look at the solutions that can be implemented at each locations, which are different depending on the most littered item. So, if we look into a little bit of the history of plastics, for the ones who aren't fully aware yet, plastics have only been around for about 73 years. So in 1950, there was barely no production of plastics for a wide adoption. And since 1950, it's been produced in exponentially growing amounts. So nowadays, we're about at 450 million tons of plastics being produced every year. And this is predicted to increase again exponentially until 2060. And beyond if we don't address this crisis of pollution that we have. Now, also just a little summary of the cycle of plastics, because some people still aren't fully aware that plastics come from fossil fuels most of the time, and they are transformed the fossil fuel into nodals or pellets, which are very small plastic items. So they essentially are often smaller than 5 millimeters in size, which we call microplastics, and they are turned through melting into the products that we use on a daily basis. These pellets and these or nodals, they can be called either way, sometimes leak just at the stage of the nodal, and they're very easy to identify. These nodals can be captured into Seabins, and we find them in most Seabins around the world, which indicate that we can address this only at the level of the pellets. We could reduce leakages. When they're turned into products that we consume, the consumables. So if I'm starting here just for a bit of context on the left side of the screen of the slide. So extracting the raw materials, turning it into nodals and pellets just below. If we go down below, we turned it into the consumable products and we follow the arrows, and then it goes into ideally a bin. But some people do litter, but what we want to bring up as education is that a lot of the marine plastics that we find are often not necessarily littered items. They're often coming from overflowing bins. They're often coming from when there are strong winds or rainfall, heavy rainfall and storms, which we are seeing in an increasing manner, unfortunately, due to climate change. So the issue of plastic pollution really comes down to how much plastic we use. And yes, also to the education of reducing littering in itself, especially things like cigarette butts. But we want to also use less plastics, and we also want to work with each plastic items and really address the issue at the source as of to how these plastics can be prevented from entering the waterways. And so also if we follow the arrows to the top, the Seabins come in and can ideally rescue some of the source plastics before they make their way to the ocean, but they also serve as a very interesting tool for education and data monitoring. So Seabin Foundation, who I'm here to also introduce you to, is the organization based in Australia. It's a not-for-profit that looks at what the Seabins are collecting. And we use this data to work with local stakeholders. So we talk about public authorities, we talk about schools and companies, corporates, and local communities, museums, and we engage with as many people as we possibly can on the findings that we find through the Seabins. So here we have the Ocean Health Lab, which is a 40-foot repurposed shipping container that has been turned into a lab where the Seabin catches are delivered on a daily basis. It's based in Sydney, which is now where the focus of the Seabin programs is happening in Australia. And the Ocean Health Lab is based at the Australian National Maritime Museum, which is at an iconic location in Sydney at Darling Harbour by the water. And we have daily visitors that take tours while our scientists are also going through the Seabin catches and identifying which plastic types are collected in the Seabins every week. So we get a trend of what items are found, and also we see variations throughout the year. So this is what the lab looks inside. So we have working benches and we have a freezer because marine debris smells if we leave it out for too long. So we freeze it. We have some items to do demonstrations for the tours. And we have a dehydrator, which allows us to really see clearly the microplastics. We've seen a huge difference between the data collections done by people on site near the Seabin when the catches are wet versus when we dehydrate it. We can see so many more microplastics, and this is unfortunate, but some of the catches reach in 24 hours up to 10,000. And community members, so we can raise awareness and address it at the source once again. So here we have Carly, one of our scientists, taking people on a tour and explaining what we do in the lab. And here are some pictures of some of the nurdles on the left side, which I've just talked about, and some of the work that happens in the lab and around. So at the museum as well, there are 3 Seabins in operations every day. And in the city of Sydney, there are 34 Seabins in operation at all time. So the girls process the catches from 34 Seabins every 2-3 weeks. They will have one catch from each of these Seabins and understand the differences between each location. We find great differences, which is very fascinating. We've also had TUM here, which shows bins that have been filled up after rainfall event, floods, and all of the marine debris that is found into this these bins have been collected within 24 hours. So a Seabin has been emptied multiple times because they can collect up to 20 kilos a day. On average, collect about 4 kilos a day, but on heavy rainfall event, they collect a lot. And what Tom is explaining here is that even though it looks like it's a lot of leaves and branches and seaweed, when we look closer, we can identify all the microplastics that are found in there. A lot of it comes from polystyrene and foam and can easily be confused with seeds and natural organic matter. But unfortunately, a lot of these soft and hard broken plastics keep breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces and creating a problem. And often people don't necessarily see those small items unless we shed some light on it. So microplastics, as I've mentioned, are smaller than 5 millimeters in size, and they are one of the key items that we find into the Seabins, as well as other items like the bottles, the ropes, and so on. I have another graph soon to show those items. Microplastics and any plastics, when they break down, they become a problem because of the surface area that they provide for toxins to be released in the marine environment, or for bacteria and fuels to attach to the plastics and then be ingested by marine life. So we really want to avoid them becoming microplastics in the first place. If you can't stop them from entering marine environment, we want to stop them breaking down into small pieces and entering the food chain. They also contribute to climate change through releasing ethylene and methane when they're in the marine environment. So another great reason to avoid them. And they also have been shown to have an impact on the gender of turtles hatching from their nests. So when the sand is hot, after a certain temperature, the turtles will turn out to be female. And below a certain temperature, they will be male. Nature has its own way to balance out where the turtles are born and the ecosystem's gender, so that they can reproduce naturally in a right amount. But when there is a lot of plastic, microplastics or plastic pieces on a beach, the temperature of the sand has been proven to be higher overnight, which is when the turtles' gender gets determined before they hatch. So we really want to, again, avoid microplastics being both on beaches and in the water, to take care for marine environment and our health. Here, I've just got a bit of an example of how deep we go into the data. So we make pie charts and we look at the top plastic items. So here, microplastics in terms of count of what, not of weight, not the volume, but number of plastic items. Microplastics is overwhelmingly dominant in Sydney. And then when we look at the fourth category, we start being able to identify problematic, recognizable items like ropes and plastic food wrappers, fishing lines, cigarette butts, lids, and straws. And we can address these one by one in a strategic way. So here's a breakdown of the microplastics on the right. And we can find the soft microplastics, the hard ones, the noodles and the foam, and then we have the microfibers as well. And all of these are tied to certain items that we can then prove that needs to be mitigated. Another example of information we can identify are the brands that we find the most in the Seabins. In Sydney, Cadbury is the number one by far, and then we have the Mars chocolate bars and Mentos, and all the ones that you can see in this graph have been found in the Seabins in Sydney. We can monitor bans, so straw bans, plastic bag bans, single-use items. Luckily, in Sydney, the straw ban has been effective, and we've seen a reduction of about 37% over a year period since the ban has been implemented. So Seabins are great to monitor that kind of information. And finally, I just want to raise some solutions that we can all apply. I'm sure you know many of them, but let's keep believing in behavior change. It is hard to change our ways of living, but it is through each person doing some little changes, even if we're not perfect. We can all collectively make a difference as a community, and we can also bring some of those changes in the businesses and the places where we work, as well as our houses. And we can push for changes in policy and demanding more of those bans or more of the alternative packaging products. And we can think about other products that can be repurposed, like in the building sectors, which we do find a lot of, as well as, cars are being built with plastics, office equipment. So all of these materials can all be made probably in a way that would be more conscious of our beloved oceans. So avoiding single-use plastics, refusing overly packaged items, washing clothes in cold water to avoid microfibers, using a filter to stop those microfibers from releasing into waterways. We can also consider secondhand and limiting fast fashion. Microfibers are a very big problem in the marine environment. They get through all the little filters that we try to put on the way. I encourage friends and family to do the same. And I'll just finish on this quote from Sir David Attenborough, who says, "The final chapter is ours to write. We know what we need to do. What happens next is up to us." So I invite you all to jump on this journey with us.
Thank you very much, Mahi, Paquette. A couple of questions, Mahi. What are the most incredible things you found inside the Seabins, the nets of the Seabins?
Yeah, obviously I've spoken a lot about the microplastics. To me, they're really the craziest because of the quantity. But if we're looking at fun facts, just last week we found some of those, balloons that get all twisted into some forms. We found a Mario Bros, the video game thing. We found a chair once floating and just being next to the Seabin. It wouldn't fit in the catch bag, but a whole chair got there. We find large balloons. We find construction items. So and there's also a Christmas tree, little artificial leaves and artificial plants, which are becoming more and more popular to create beautiful environments, but we do find a lot of them. And no doubt they would be confusing for the marine animals as food. So these are only a few of them. We have 55 categories.
You did explain that the Seabins began in Mallorca, in Europe, here in the Mediterranean, and then spread to 53 countries in the early days of 2018. Since 2020, you have been focusing on city program, mostly in Sydney, Australia. Can you tell us more about why you focus on particular cities?
Absolutely. So we noticed that people were excited about adopting Seabins and installing them, but unfortunately that was only tackling the solution. Well, it was helping for cleanup, but we are very aware that Seabins will not clean up all the plastic. There is so much being released into the water. So looking at the data is what can help us prevent it at the source. And to get the data, we need to have our own team looking into it on a regular basis. So focusing on a city where we can collect these catches on a regular basis means that we can then take things at a higher level upstream and create change. So we require a minimum of 8 Seabins to be funded to go in the water as a service deliverable with the staff that empties them and brings the catches to the lab so that we can analyze it. So it's becoming a bit more of a holistic approach to the Seabin technology.
Great. And finally, how can we join your movement and implement a city program in our town?
Thanks for asking. So to bring a city program in someone's city, we really focus on bigger cities as well. We've identified these are the biggest problem to tackle. So larger cities are our main focus, and we need to have the funding for 8 Seabins at a time. So we call on corporate sponsorships, public authorities to look at funding a city program for at least 3 years. This is the time that it takes to generate a really good snapshot of the data situation from a baseline, and then to monitoring solutions being implemented. And from that point, when the community is supporting this city program, we can see great improvement.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mahi, Paquette, for your time, your work, and your inspiration, and for joining us here in Fixing the Future 23.
Thank you for having me, and I wish you a great rest of your evening.